That's a lot of losing. I'm pretty sure players are getting fed up right now. That's my guess as to why CJ trade hasn't happened, because basically you hit the nail on the head. That's like the most complicated part about where the NBA is right now.
Gets it off in time. He's got it, baby! Big time Nets win!
The only Net fans you know? The only Nets fans you know? Man. I mean, come on, man. Or are these guys?
Welcome back to the Only Net Fans You Know podcast. I'm Peter. Welcome to episode number 97. Today I'm joined by a great returning guest, USA Today's Nets Wire's own Sharif Phillips-Keaton. How's it going, bro?
Going good, Pete. Glad to be here, talk some ball with you. How you feeling?
Good. I'm doing well. I think the last time I talked to you was maybe like November 2nd or 3rd, but the Nets were 3-3 at the time. And I feel like everything has changed. What is the energy in the locker room now compared to when we last talked?
The gist I get from, talking to the players after the game is, and I think Nick Claxton said it the other night, according to Brian Lewis, just, they're tired of losing. And obviously we've talked about this. I'm sure you've talked about this on previous shows. Players don't tank and coaches don't tank. But that's what front offices do. It is just like that, it's like that clash of, like you said, doing what's right for the franchise is always best. But when you're in a situation like the Nets, it can have an adverse effect on the players. And that's a lot of losing. I'm pretty sure players are getting fed up right now.
There was that big Ben Simmons quote. Is the team just frustrated right now?
But we got to compete. Like, we can't go in there. I know this is like a kind of like a rebuild situation, but we got to go in there like we want to win, regardless of what the front office is expecting. We got to. That's just personally, I want to win and compete. Same as the coaches. So we got to show up and compete.
And talk about.
But it doesn't feel like the same team that we had maybe like a month ago. Am I crazy?
No, you're not crazy. That is what's going on. Especially when from the beginning of the season, training camp, all that. It's like one of those things, like the players obviously understand the reality of the NBA. And I think even Dorian talked about that like a week before he got traded, is like, you can get traded at any time. And all you can really do is do your job, because the worst thing you can do is not do your job while worrying about getting traded. But I think at some point, the players that are left over start to realize, like, we're not adding really any players, or like we understand that if players are being dealt, it's for something that may not necessarily make the team better on the floor. Because even when you look at Schroder was traded away, I think it's for like 3 second-round picks. Granted, you got Reese Beekman, but then you get DeAnthony Melton, who's literally not going to play the rest of the season. Dorian and Shake Milton got D'Angelo Russell back, so that's actually been interesting. And you get Maxwell Lewis, who gets hurt, and that's unfortunate. And then you get more second-round picks. But I think the players are starting to pick up on the fact that the actual wins and losses aren't as important as draft positioning is. And I think, when you start losing a lot, then it like starts to seep in. And I think that's what that Ben quote was all about.
With CJ, I feel like half of the franchise has like diluted their brain into thinking that he's going to get us 2 first-rounders, a good young player. OKC is going to open up the stash, and we're just going to take all these first-rounders, take as many as we can. And in reality, I don't think we're going to get the ultimate haul. I don't think we're not going to get nothing for him. But I personally think that some of the better contracts OKC does have to trade for CJ are guys who play. They're in the rotation. So I don't think you're going to have OKC trading picks and rotation players. So it gets me to the point of something's going to have to give if they don't want to add in a third team. And by the way, I'm not listing Topic for a reason, because I don't think that's even a possibility.
I agree with your overall premise. From what I've seen of different people around the NBA when they discuss his value, is it seems like 2 first-round picks is probably like somebody is getting desperate. I think the Kings were thrown out as a team that if things continue to go, well, I want to say they've been winning recently since they fired Mike Brown, but if things go back down to what they were before they fired him, could they be desperate enough to give you two first round picks? Sure. But I think if you can get a first round pick and maybe a young player for CJ, I think that's a really good haul. Do you add Devin Carter? I think Devin Carter is making like around $8 million. So then do you find someone who's making like 10, 12 million? Do you want that player? Like it's so complicated with the new CBA is the point.
So obviously in post-productions, Shams had to drop that. De'Aaron Fox is now in the market. This kind of changes things big time. If you're the Kings, are you still interested in CJ? Probably not. When the news comes out that you're going to trade your franchise cornerstone, I'd assume you're closer to a teardown and rebuild than being buyers at the trade deadline. De'Aaron Fox, 27 years old, lefty point guard. He's averaged 25 points a game the last 3 seasons. He's shooting 46% from the field this year, 34% from 3, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, led the league in steals last year. He's under contract this year for $34 million, and he is under contract next year for $37 million. We've had Brian Lewis, Frank Isola, Ian Begley all mention that the Nets are interested in him. I don't know if the Nets are really going to be interested enough to throw out some major assets that other teams might be willing to do. I think there could be a fit here, and it does make sense. The Nets do need a point guard. You have the whole thing with Jordy. Jordy was with him in Sacramento. I just don't think the Nets want to trade to get him. If you're the Nets, do you want to pay for him in assets and then have to pay him with a big contract? I don't know if this makes sense right now, but I think Fox would have been a great pickup if you don't snag a point guard in the draft and you add him as a free agent after next year.
The reality of the current CBA is real. Teams know if eventually you're going to put enough players on a team that you might be up against the first apron, the second apron, you have to keep ways to get cheaper players. So teams aren't really giving up first round picks like they used to because you didn't have to worry about the salary cap as much. The CBA wasn't as restrictive. So if you get one first round pick for CJ, I think that's pretty good, even if the young player isn't necessarily, somebody you can see in the rotation. Like, for example, if it's the Thunder and let's say they give you, I don't know, throw out like a 2026 first round pick, and let's say you get Aaron Wiggins, for example. I think that's pretty good for CJ because remember, CJ is playing pretty well, but he's not.
He's
probably not going to make those.
Though. That's the problem.
True.
That's my issue. I thought the same thing, and then I had someone shit on me. Plays for them. Like, yeah, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Well, I don't. So I'll say this. This is my pushback to that person is, yes, he plays, but he is coming off the bench. And sure, like he's part of the rotation. OKC's deep. They go about, I think, 9-10 players deep a night, and they all can play. Like, that's not the issue. But like CJ is making 22.5 this year. There's only 2 other players on OKC that's making more than that right now. And SGA, who the Thunder are not giving up, the next closest player that makes below what he makes is Lou Dort at 16.5. Do you want a first round pick in Lou Dort? I mean, you'll take it, but like, is that like what you want? So that's basically, you hit the nail on the head. That's like the most complicated part about where the NBA is right now. If they're getting CJ and you're giving up 1 first round pick, especially when you consider they still have to give up salary anyway. So I think that's also what complicates the CJ trade is there aren't really many young players that are on their second contract right now where they can make around 20 million. So then you have to get creative. Like if you do a 2-for-1, are you still going to get a first round pick? If it's a team that's rebuilding, it's like, that's why I think it's honestly, that's my guess as to why CJ trade hasn't happened. Cause I've been playing around with the the trade machine on Spot Track, and then if you're dealing with a team that's hard cap at the first apron, or they're a cap space team, or they're up against a second apron, it changes so many dynamics, and it's not just as simple as player first round pick. I mean, the first round pick is simple, but then it's like, how much does this player make?
A lot of teams are going to be affected by that, and fans are really not paying attention to these little things that are put into the CBA that make a big difference.
Basically, you hit the nail on the head. That's like the most complicated part about where the NBA is right now. That's what I think is the biggest takeaway. I mean, this is more like an NBA takeaway, not a Nets takeaway, but that's the biggest takeaway from the CBA for anyone who's wondering, because that's what people are thinking too, is like, why aren't there as many trades there used to be? Well, that's the problem. Is now I would say most of the teams have to take in as much salary as they're giving out. So you giving a draft pick doesn't really change that equation. It matters the players you're sending. And then it's like, if you're the Nets, and it'd be one thing if CJ was making $30 million, and then maybe you could find a player that you're like, hey, even if they're older, hey, we'd rather have this guy than, I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't mind keeping CJ, but if someone's willing to give you a first round pick, you got to figure out where that goes.
The third pick in this year's draft will be made by the New Jersey Nets.
The Nets could go and not win another game for the rest of the year. And that does not mean Cooper Flagg will be wearing a Brooklyn Nets jersey next year. It doesn't.
Also true.
What it means, and I think this is the super most important part, it gives you the opportunity to have the best chance to draft the best player. And in the situation that the Nets are in, that's all you can ask for. Just have us in the running. What's the worst that happens if they do finish with the second worst record? What's the worst that happens? You draft 6? There's a lot of good prospects here. But the thing is, you have to be, at the ballpark to play ball.
That's the game they're in right now. If you are 1 through 3, you have the same chance to get that number 1 pick. Now, obviously, we saw last year, does that mean you're getting the number 1 pick? No, because somehow the Pistons get screwed every year out of the number 1 pick, and it went to Atlanta. They got the best rookie in a draft. I guess people weren't too thrilled about, but I like Richase. But like, that's also the game you're playing. Is you might get the number 1 pick, you might get the 10, but if you get the number 1 pick and you get Cooper Flagg, it's all worth it. And you may only have to, and depending on how Cooper Flagg is right out the gate, you might only have to do it 1 year. Maybe you could be like the Spurs who were able to get Wemby, and then look how like they're probably never letting go to Wemby. They're never letting him go. And now you don't have to worry about that. Now you can add Chris Paul and add other veterans, and then you don't even have to worry about a rebuild. You can just say, all right, how can we make this team the best it can be around Wemby while he's still cheap? Keep that in mind.
Oh, that's the key. That's the key.
This year, obviously, we're tanking to get a high pick, but next year you can rebuild without tanking. We're not guaranteed a top pick. Let's say you draft, I don't know. Let's say we draft 3rd this year. You have them on the team, and then you bring in a star. The star's not going to want to wait for them to develop. That player's going to probably want to win now. So now you're adding vets onto the roster. You re-sign CT. Your cap space is automatically going to be used up. If you wind up rebuilding next year, maybe not tank, but you still get a top player, probably in the lottery. You have 2 young cornerstone prospects. Maybe one of them works out. Maybe both work out. You have CT. You're going to re-sign him, and you could build around that little core. You still have all your cap space. You still have all your picks. And you use all that cap space, and you're over the first apron, over the second apron. It takes years to get over something like that. Look at Phoenix.
It's so much more strategy to it, and that's why. And obviously, I know we're pressed against time, but just like real quick, that's why sometimes even just the subtle minutia of Do you have this guy's bird rights or not? Even if you think about I think for CJ, for example, when it comes to a trade, I believe he has a trade kicker. I probably should have checked that before I brought it up. But like, if you trade him, that might
very
increase
small,
this. Right.
It's
But
small.
yeah, but that might be important because there might be another player. Maybe they also have a trade kicker. That's a lot. Like, it's just so many things where, yeah, when we're all talking on Twitter and we're all like, oh yeah, trade this player for this player and a pick, get it done. Like, it's cool, but that's not how it really works. At least not now.
So I'm going to ask you a couple predictions on what you think might happen towards the end of the year, maybe post trade deadline. What happens to Bogey, Melton, D'Lo, and Ben? What happened to them? Are they bought out? They stay in the Nets to the end of the year? What do you think?
So my suspicion is that D'Lo and Ben are going to be on the team post trade deadline. I don't really see, like, anything could happen. But like for D'Lo, for example, I think it just would depend on what they were getting. But I mean, what is somebody giving you for D'Lo these days? A second round pick? Is it just, and on top of that, which I think is a point, I don't know if I did mention earlier, even though you're in a rebuild, I think it's still important to have some competent players to help the development of the other players. That's why when they traded Dennis and they didn't really have a point guard outside of Ben, I was like, all right, I get that you're trying to prioritize draft picks, but somebody's got to get these guys the ball, like Noah Clowney. Somebody's got to be able to get these guys the ball. And then when they got
How do you
D'Lo,
run an offense?
right. So stuff like that is, I think, also important. Like sometimes you can't just just throw these players on the floor and see what happens. Like you got to have some type of structure, even in a rebuild. Ben, the thing with Ben is if he is on this roster when the season's over, that is $40 million in cap space freed up. And I think it's been reported by Brian and other Brian Lewis and other writers. There's really no incentive for Ben to take a buyout unless he was going to a team he really would like to go to maybe have a chance to win. But
Miami?
Ben is maybe.
Well,
but,
if Butler's still there. If Butler's still there, of course.
Right. But, and I think I was thinking of this point earlier before we got on, is Ben is also playing for his next contract too. He's a free agent after the season, and he's not getting anywhere close to $40 million. But he's playing for next season too, so it may not even be much of an incentive for him to go to a different team where he might have his role minimized. I just think it makes too much sense for him to be on this team, unless there's a caveat, unless there is a team desperate enough to maybe give you a lot for him. And by a lot, I mean like 2 second-round picks or like maybe even a heavily protected first, something like that. Melton and Bogey, I don't know if they're bought out or they're waived, but either way, I don't think they're playing a game for the Nets. Especially, well, obviously Melton can't because he's rehabbing.
Yeah. So
and I mean, I know Bogey is rehabbing.
Why is he still on the team? Actually, no, I know an answer. Go ahead, but I think I have an answer.
No. If you want to add, I mean, it is also like I don't know if it's like something behind the scenes that has to get figured out, because I don't know if you waive him, does he still get to rehab at your facility? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the minutia. Okay, so I know there's certain minutia with that, but then it's also like, I mean, it really doesn't
in a
like
sign and trade, Sharif.
Right.
That's why you would keep him. That's the only reason why I think you would keep him.
Right. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I think about those 4 guys.
Quick hits right here. Is Day traded? Yes or no?
No.
Where does CJ go?
I think he's going to the Thunder.
I think he's going to Houston.
Ooh, okay. I haven't heard that.
They need the shooting too. They own our draft picks. I could see something, a deal go through. They have the contracts to match it up. Jeff Green's contract, and I forgot, and Steven Adams' contract actually works perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of draft picks. You know, they had our draft picks. You know, they had us by the balls with these draft picks, and they still have a lot of the Phoenix picks. I wouldn't be shocked to see like a first and then one of these swaps down the line onto becoming negated or something. I really wouldn't be shocked. I could be wrong. I think OKC is the most likely, but my gut feeling tells me Houston.
That's actually interesting. I never thought much about the Rockets, but I think that's actually really interesting.
What is your favorite Nets memory for a game that you were at?
It's gonna be weird because the Nets didn't win, but it was that series. I don't know if it was game 2 or game 3 against the Sixers, and I think Nick Claxton and Joel had got into it, and just the entire arena, like it's different when you know like the crowd is normally hostile to the opponent, but when it's something like Joel comes to Brooklyn and he already kind of has a reputation of just taking things above where they need to go, then you have Nick Claxton who seems like he's about that action, you know, at given points. And just hearing the amount of people, you know, shouting expletives and all that other stuff, that was probably my favorite moment, even though they lost that game. I just think having a crowd that hyped, which hasn't happened much since then, to be clear, that was probably my favorite moment covering the team, just to like be in that type of atmosphere.
Anyway, bro, let's get some plugs in there for you. Where can they find you?
Guys, you know, Sharif Phillips-Keaton, Pete, thanks for having me on. If you guys want to support me and my work, I post everything I write at netswire.com. You'll see the little icon. It's part of USA Today Sports, and you know, not trying to plug too hard, but appreciate anyone
plug. Go.
who reads my work. And obviously, if you want to chat with me of anything basketball related, doesn't have to be Nets, but I'm also okay with that. At Sharif Keaton, as you see on the screen, you know, let's continue talking ball. Hopefully like me and Pete, because this has been a great conversation.
All right, guys. You can follow me at NetFans, you know, on Twitter. Obviously, you're watching this on YouTube already. Subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. Like if you enjoyed the episode. But yeah, man. Have a great day. Have a great night. And let's go Nets.